You have probably seen the news about how our world is struggling due to burning fossil fuels for the last 150 years, and that we need to get to 100% renewable energy soon. But how far away are we from that goal, and how much longer will it take for us to get there? Let's unfold the future of renewable energy. If we think about energy generation in terms of raw electricity generation, then it looks like we're doing pretty good at converting our generation mix towards lower carbon sources like nuclear, hydro, wind, solar, and other renewables. But I'd like us to think of energy from a more holistic perspective, which includes transportation and heat. And since the world is still heavily using oil, coal, and natural gas for transportation and heat, we have a long way to go before we hit 100% renewable energy. So how do we get there, and what would the world look like if we did? Keep watching to find out. In 2021, the International Energy Agency crafted a projection map of the world's energy outlook that highlights where they expect our planet to be in 2030 and 2040. The projections created don't make me excited. Sure, I love seeing renewables doubling every 10 years, but I think we all know that the pace of transition needs to be faster than what they're showing here, especially as oil, natural gas, and coal are still potentially the leaders in our energy mix when looking ahead to 2040. There are some valuable highlights worth mentioning, including the fact that we would need twice as much energy today if it weren't for continuous improvements in energy efficiency. An example of that has been the transition from incandescent bulbs at 60 watts to compact fluorescent bulbs using around 20 watts, and then to LED bulbs which sip power at around 10 watts. If we can continue to find more energy efficiency in our world, then we make it easier to depend on renewable energy for our needs and can slow down the continuous growth of our worldwide energy needs. One thing my wife and I continually talk about is that with our central air conditioner unit being on its last legs, what if we tried to find the resources to purchase a heat pump? It could act as our air conditioner during the summer months and be our primary heat source during the winter. It would still have to be supplemented with our natural gas furnace during the coldest parts of Canadian winter, but the heat pump runs on electricity and can be multiple times more efficient than our central air conditioning unit or our furnace, reducing the energy use of our home. It sounds great, though it would be a costly endeavor. Unfortunately, one of the most important things for all of us to think about when talking about energy or electricity is that there are still nearly 1 billion people without consistent access to electricity, and a large percentage of them have no access at all. So as that hopefully changes, we will need to work together as a society to enable them to create power they need with less pollution. Do you ever think about the energy mix in your province or state or territory? What about your country? Do you think about how energy is being generated in other countries? I'd be super curious to read your insights if you'd be willing to share them, and I'll answer as many comments as I can. So what has been our energy mix? Well, over the last 40 years, we've certainly made progress reducing the amount of coal and oil we're using and adding more renewable sources. But natural gas continues to eat up most of the coal and oil-based energy shares. And while natural gas is in many ways better than those other two, it still pollutes and isn't renewable. And we can't forget that global energy consumption is rising and will continue to rise for some time. Driven by industrialization in developing countries, projections suggest a 50% increase in energy demands by 2050. Even if we ignore what coal, oil, and natural gas might be doing to the planet, their future is limited because they aren't renewable. And to meet our future needs, we need to be thinking about renewable, scalable energy solutions. So what options do we have? And can they really take on a leading percentage of our energy mix? After I talk about each option, I'm going to give it a rating out of 5 on how likely I believe it to be that the renewable energy source could become an energy leader over the next decade. First off, there's solar. There are multiple types of solar that exist, but traditional PV panels are the ones making the biggest impact on our world. The cost of manufacturing keeps dropping, their efficiency keeps improving, and as material science improves, I foresee another big jump in the potential of solar. There have been on-again, off-again updates to perovskite solar cells, which have potential manufacturing material advantages and are showing great strides in efficiency. But the big issue currently is that they degrade too quickly. One of the potentially cool technologies we might see in the near to mid future is space-based solar. Get panels above our atmosphere so they don't have that interference and beam the energy back to Earth. I don't know how viable or valuable this would actually be, but it does feel like a cool sci-fi idea, doesn't it? I feel like solar has a high potential to be an energy leader in the next decade, so I'm going to give solar a 5 out of 5. Then there's wind power. Both onshore and offshore installations continue to grow. The economies of scale in manufacturing are helping make pricing competitive, and we are continuing to learn about the dynamics of wind movement and how we can harness it to a high efficiency. Just one of the largest wind turbines can generate as much power as over 20,000 solar cells on a windy day, providing the energy needs for over 7,000 homes. Imagine if all of the wind turbines were at that scale and power generation ability. For Canada, we would only need around 2,500 wind turbines to power every home in this country. Currently, we have 7,000 wind turbines both onshore and off. One of the cool technologies that I've seen to combat the power only when the wind is blowing argument are the airborne wind energy devices. They look like kites, blimps, parachutes, or airplanes that are tethered to the ground but fly up high enough to get constant wind, helping create constant power. Could refinements and investments in this direction be the answer for wind to become a leader in energy generation around the world? I think there are many systems already in place to continue installing wind turbines and improving them further, so I'm going to give wind a 4 out of 5. As a Canadian, we call electricity for our homes hydro, because a ton of it, especially here on the eastern side of the country, get power from hydroelectric dams. There are countries that are scaling back hydro to help reverse some of the ecological harm that dams have created. But that doesn't mean the technology is doomed. There's micro hydropower, which can be relatively small scale, or run-of-the-river hydroelectricity, which doesn't create a big store of water like most hydro systems today, both of which can let fish and other wildlife through without harming them. I love the idea of microhydro for anyone living off the grid near a river or stream, especially instead of needing to use something like a diesel generator. Even with these other options, I don't know how impactful hydroelectric power will be going forward, and if it has big opportunities for growth, especially due to weather changes, so I'm gonna give hydro a 2 out of 5. Another connected idea is ocean energy. There are so many different flavors of this as we haven't really figured out the ideal way of converting the various energy producing opportunities in the most optimal, renewable, sustainable, and ecologically sound ways. But there is tidal power, wave power, ocean thermal energy conversion, also known as OTEC. I hadn't heard of OTEC before starting my research for this video. It feels a bit like heat pump technology, but with the ocean. Warm fluid rises and passes through a turbine, turning it before going down and through a condenser, cooled by cold deep sea water before being pumped around, heated up again, and around it goes using both the warmer surface water and colder deep water temperature differences to help create movement and power. There are great opportunities to generate energy here, but the ocean is so unforgiving. Between the movement of the waves, the salt water, the depths, and the things living here, I just don't see this being an easy endeavor over the next decade as a potential power source, so I have to give ocean energy a 1 out of 5. Bioenergy also has many forms, but you might know it best as biofuels. The idea that we could use renewable biomass such as crop waste, forest residues, and purpose-grown grasses, microalgae, and food waste to create energy. Basically finding a way to reuse things that we don't want or need. This technology, especially from the algae perspective, has a ton of interesting opportunities in my opinion, but I haven't seen as much movement on it as some of the others on this list. And while they are considered renewable, they can still pollute. Biodiesel combustion creates less carbon monoxide and particulate matter compared to regular diesel, but unfortunately that's not none. I give bioenergy a 1 out of 5. An energy generation technology that I don't think is getting enough attention right now is geothermal. We've long thought that drilling into the earth, far enough to superheat water to spin a turbine, was just too expensive, and so we've mostly ignored this opportunity. But advancements in drilling have opened up this technology to many new locations, so we can install it in more places than countries that don't require deep drilling, like Iceland, New Zealand, and the Philippines. I think that over the next decade, while geothermal won't likely become one of the top heavy hitters, it'll likely be on the cusp of replacing or supplementing the power generation of polluting power plants, and so with that in mind, I give geothermal a 3 out of 5. Let's switch over to some common concerns about renewable energy. I often hear that renewable sources like solar and wind are intermittent. The sun isn't always shining and the wind isn't always blowing. This raises valid questions about what happens during off-peak periods and how we can ensure a stable energy supply. But here's where cool technology is starting to come into play. Emerging technologies like solid-state batteries, flow batteries, and even compressed air storage are starting to mitigate this issue. We've gone from 15 gigawatt hours of energy storage in 2020 to around 43 gigawatt hours in 2022, and we're projected to reach around 74 gigawatt hours by the end of 2023, a solid indication that we're finding ways to store that precious renewable energy for when we need it most. Another concern centers on the land use and environmental impact of renewable energy. Solar farms and wind turbines need a lot of space. A 2020 study published in Nature Sustainability estimates that to meet the US's power demands through solar power alone would require 0.5% of the country's land. But even if we were to double that amount to be 1%, that would only be around the size of Indiana, the 38th largest state. And one point that people often forget about when talking about solar specifically is that we continue to see small increases in new panel efficiency over time, going from an average around 11% efficiency to 16% efficiency in 2022, with some concentrator systems going as high as 25% efficiency. There are experimental solar panels with efficiency values as high as nearly 45%. If we can double the efficiency of our solar panels, we might be able to generate just as much power in half as much space. And finally, solar panels don't need to be the only thing happening on that land, as buildings, parking structures, parks, and agriculture can all have solar panels on them, and solar doesn't need to be our only source of power. As we move towards renewables, we need to acknowledge the concern of resource scarcity, particularly in relation to minerals like lithium, cobalt, and rare earth elements, which are essential for creating solar panels, wind turbines, and batteries. Yet the picture isn't entirely bleak. The World Bank predicts that while demand will increase, it will be within manageable levels, provided we invest in efficient production, recycling, and substitution. There's an exciting opportunity for us to create a circular economy in the renewable sector, focusing on reusing and recycling components. It's also worth noting the opinion of experts like Jigar Shah, co-founder of Generate Capital, who argues that concerns about material scarcity often underestimate our capacity for innovation. Shah believes that as renewable energy technologies evolve, we'll develop new methods to reduce our dependence on scarce resources and create more efficient energy generation and storage systems. So when do we think we will have 100% renewable energy generation, and why do we think it'll be at that point in time? I think many environmentalists are trying to aim towards a goal of 2050 or earlier using currently existing technologies, and the general public scoffs and wonders how feasible it is. But there's this great quote from an article on landartgenerator.org. We could do so in less land area than we have already paved or built upon. A reminder that while it seems massive to need to transform hundreds of thousands of square kilometers into renewable energy generation, humans are good at building things when there is a need, but it won't happen overnight. I think that with advances in technology and an interest from governments and corporations of the world, we can hit a 2050 date for converting the majority of our energy generation to renewable sources, with a complete conversion probably by the 2060s. But that will require some real change in how our world works, and that will be harder than the process of building what we need. I don't know if you could tell, but I'm a big fan of geothermal energy, hence why I did a recent video on how geothermal is the answer, so please be sure to check that out.